Honestly, I still imagine that tiny sombrero sitting on a 4-foot cactus and just, laugh at how incredibly petty one can be when pushed. I mean, weaponizing state botany laws against a tyrannical neighborhood board is why we all love sovereign justice in the first place, because some people just beg to be humbled. Anyway, let's just dive right into it.
I didn't move to a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona to off-road in a 2018 Honda Civic. That wasn't on my bingo card when I signed the mortgage papers. You buy into an HOA because you want the pristine lawns, the quiet streets, and the illusion that your property value is protected by a shield of aggressively enforced rules. You don't buy in to feel like you're navigating the lunar surface every time you turn onto your own street. But there I was, at 7:30 in the morning, holding a scalding hot cup of black coffee, about to experience a localized seismic event. Let's talk about this pothole. It wasn't just a divot. It wasn't a little crack in the asphalt. It was a crater. It was the Grand Canyon of cul-de-sacs. It had its own gravitational pull, a distinct ecosystem. And I'm pretty sure if you dropped a penny down there, you'd hear it hit water. It had been growing steadily for 3 months, right in the middle of Desert Oasis Way, Tamwer, which is the only road leading to my section of the neighborhood. You couldn't avoid it unless you drove onto the Johnsons' immaculate Bermuda grass lawn, and considering Old Man Johnson spent his retirement staring out the window with binoculars waiting for someone to do exactly that, swerving wasn't an option. So, I took it slow. I inched my Civic forward, calculating the trajectory, praying to the suspension gods. I eased the front right tire down into the abyss. And that's when it happened. A sound that will haunt my dreams forever. Crack, snap, clunk. It sounded like a metal skeleton getting its knees broken by a mob enforcer. The entire car violently lurched downward. My hand jerked. The lid popped off my travel mug, and 16 ounces of 190-degree dark roast coffee erupted like Old Faithful, launching directly into my lap. I didn't just scream. I hit octaves that dogs in neighboring zip codes could hear. I slammed on the brakes, which only made the car violently rock back and forth inside the crater, splashing the remaining coffee onto the dashboard, the steering wheel, and somehow the ceiling. I sat there, hyperventilating, soaked in boiling bean water, listening to the agonizing scrape of my undercarriage grinding against the jagged asphalt edge of the pothole. I managed to limp the car out of the hole and back up my driveway. I left a trail of mysterious automotive fluids on the concrete. The right side of the car was sagging so heavily it looked like it had given up on life. I had to borrow my wife's SUV just to get to work that day, smelling like a burnt Starbucks and pure, unadulterated rage. The next day, I had the Civic towed to a local mechanic. His name was Dave. Dave was a guy who looked like he'd seen it all and was entirely unimpressed by my tragedy. He put the car on the lift, shined a flashlight underneath, whistled through his teeth, and then looked at me with the pitying eyes of a doctor delivering bad news. "Well, Jack," Dave said, wiping grease onto a rag that was already 90% grease. "You obliterated your control arm. The ball joint is shot. You cracked the strut mount, and your tie rod looks like a bent paperclip. You hit a curb doing 50? "I hit a pothole doing 3 miles an hour in my own neighborhood," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Dave laughed. A deep, hearty smoker's laugh. "Must be one hell of a pothole, man. That's gonna run you about $1,200, parts and labor. Oh, and you need an alignment now, obviously." $1,200. $1,200 of my hard-earned post-tax dollars evaporated because the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association couldn't be bothered to call a guy with a truck full of asphalt. I paid the man, took the invoice, and felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. This was a declaration of war. The monthly HOA board meeting was scheduled for the very next night. I marched into the community clubhouse clutching Dave's invoice like it was the Declaration of Independence. The clubhouse smelled like stale Folgers, and the overwhelming scent of vanilla air freshener trying to mask the smell of damp carpet. Sitting at the folding table at the front of the room was the board. And right in the middle, looking like a gargoyle guarding the gates of suburban hell, it was Brenda. Brenda was the HOA treasurer. She was a woman in her late 50s whose hair was sprayed so stiff and high it could probably deflect small arms' fire. She wore pastel cardigans, oversized reading glasses attached to a beaded chain around her neck, and carried an aura of absolute, unearned authority. Brenda treated the HOA treasury like it was her own personal dragon horde. She loved the power. She loved saying no. I waited through 30 agonizing minutes of neighborly complaints. Someone's trash cans were out 2 hours past the deadline. Someone else painted their front door a shade of beige that was too aggressive. Finally, it was open floor. I stood up. "Hi, yes, Jack from down on Desert Oasis Way," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I want to talk about the crater in the middle of the road. Yesterday I hit it, and it destroyed my car's suspension." I slapped the invoice down on the folding table in front of Brenda. $1,200 in damages. "I'd like to know when the HOA is going to reimburse me, and more importantly, when that hazard is getting paved." Brenda didn't even look at the invoice. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh. She picked up a pen and tapped it against her clipboard. "Jack, is it?" she asked, though she knew exactly who I was because she had fined me $40 2 years ago for leaving my garage door open for an hour while I was mowing the lawn. "The association is not liable for your driving habits. If you can't navigate the community roads safely, perhaps you should be more careful." "Careful?" I barked, a little louder than I intended. The 3 other residents in the room shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs. "It spans the entire width of the lane, Brenda. It's unavoidable, and it's been there for 3 months. It is the HOA's explicit responsibility to maintain common roadways. Auko, it's literally in the bylaws." "We are well aware of the bylaws, Jack," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. She interlaced her fingers and rested them on the table. "However, at this current juncture, the HOA lacks the liquid capital to prioritize minor road patching. Paving is expensive. We have to budget for these things." I stared at her. I literally could not comprehend the sheer audacity of the words coming out of her mouth. "Lacks the liquid capital? Brenda, was. You just approved a $15,000 custom mahogany gate for the front entrance, a gate that gets stuck open every time it rains." "That gate is a crucial security feature and an investment in our community's aesthetic value," she countered smoothly, not missing a beat. "A pothole is a temporary inconvenience. I suggest you simply drive around it. Now, moving on to the issue of the Hendersons' holiday lights." "Drive around it?" I interrupted, my blood pressure spiking. "You want me to drive onto a neighbor's private property to avoid a hazard you refuse to fix? Are you authorizing me to trespass, Brenda?" "I am not authorizing anything, Jack," she snapped, her pastel cardigan practically bristling. "I am telling you that the road will be fixed when the budget allows, which will not be in this fiscal quarter. Your request for reimbursement is denied. This conversation is over." She banged a little wooden gavel she had actually bought for herself. It was infuriating. I looked at the other board members. They were all staring down at their notes, too terrified of Brenda to make eye contact with me. I slowly picked up my invoice. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the folding table, though the temptation was incredibly strong. I just smiled. A tight, cold, completely unhinged smile. "Okay, Brenda," I said softly. "If the HOA can't fix it, I guess I'll just have to handle it myself." "Any unauthorized modifications to common property will result in immediate fines and legal action," she warned, pointing her pen at me. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of breaking the rules," I replied, turning my back on her. I'm going to follow them to the letter. I walked out of that clubhouse into the warm Arizona night, my mind racing. I was beyond mad. I was zeroed in. If they weren't going to maintain the road, I was going to make it their worst nightmare. The wheels of sovereign justice had officially started turning. The very next morning I decided to test Brenda's bluff. If she said I couldn't make unauthorized modifications, I would try to get an authorized one. I called up a private paving contractor, a guy named Mike. Mike was the kind of guy who communicated entirely in grunts, head scratches, and pointing at things with a measuring tape. He showed up in a beaten-up Ford F-250. Took one look at the pothole, and whistled. "Yeah," Mike grunted, kicking a loose chunk of asphalt. "That's a big boy, needs milling. Base layer shot. I can patch it, but it'll run you about $400. You paying out of pocket for a private road?" "Consider it a donation to my own sanity," I told him. "Can you do it today?" Mike scratched his neck. "Yeah, I got some cold patch in the truck. Give me 20 minutes to set up the cones." He didn't even get the first cone off the back of his truck before a high-pitched whine pierced the morning air. I turned to see Brenda rocketing down the street in her personal, HOA-funded electric golf cart. It had a little spinning orange light on top that she had bought on Amazon. She slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt inches from Mike's boots. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, vaulting out of the golf cart with terrifying agility. "Who are you? What are you doing to the road?" Mike looked at her, then looked at me, completely deadpan. "I'm Mike. I'm fixing the hole." "Absolutely not!" Brenda yelled, waving her arms. "This is private HOA property. You do not have authorization to perform maintenance. Stop immediately or I am calling the police for trespassing and vandalism." Mike let out a long, slow breath. He picked up his orange cone and tossed it back into the truck bed. "Look, buddy," he said to me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I don't do neighborhood drama. I pave driveways. I'm out." "Mike, wait, I'm paying you." "Not worth the headache, man," he said, already climbing into the cab. He started the engine and drove off, leaving me standing alone with Brenda and the crater. She crossed her arms, looking unimaginably smug. "I told you, Jack. Unauthorized modifications. You will be receiving a formal warning in the mail for this stunt." "It's a hazard, Brenda," I yelled, finally losing my cool. "Someone is going to break an axle." "Then they should drive slower," she retorted, climbing back into her golf cart. "Have a blessed day, Jack." She zipped away, the little orange light spinning mockingly. I stood there staring at the pothole for a long time. She had blocked the repair. She wouldn't fix it herself. She was holding the neighborhood hostage purely out of spite and a power trip. I went back inside my house, walked straight into my home office, and booted up my computer. It was time to go to war. I pulled out my physical copy of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CC and Rs. Most people use this massive 300-page binder as a monitor stand. I treat it like a religious text. If you want to beat a tyrant, you have to read their rulebook. I spent 4 hours combing through every single clause, subclause, and addendum regarding property maintenance, common areas, and hazard mitigation. I was looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything I could leverage. I drank 3 cups of coffee. I highlighted pages until my eyes burned. And then, buried on page 142, under a section titled Community Beautification and Hazard Management, I found it. Section 7, paragraph B. In the event that the association fails to maintain, repair, or address a documented hazard in a common area for a period exceeding 90 consecutive days from the date of initial written notice, adjacent homeowners may take temporary non-destructive landscaping measures to clearly mark the hazard for the safety of the community, provided such measures adhere to the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. I read it again. Then I read it a third time. I started laughing out loud in my empty office. Temporary landscaping measures. Aesthetic standards. To mark a hazard. The pothole had been there for over 90 days. I had emails proving I had reported it to the board 3.5 months ago. I had the legal right, under their own ironclad rules, to put landscaping in the pothole. But a potted geranium wasn't going to cut it. A traffic cone wasn't landscaping. I needed something that screamed malicious compliance, something they couldn't just brush aside, something that would make Brenda's life an absolute, unmitigated hell. I turned to Google and started researching Arizona state property laws. I needed to know what kind of landscaping was untouchable. What could I put in that hole that the HOA legally couldn't remove without jumping through massive hoops? That's when I hit the jackpot. The motherlode. The holy grail of southwestern legal loopholes. The Arizona Native Plant Law. ARS Section 3. 901. I started reading the statutes, my smile growing wider and more sinister by the second. The state of Arizona takes its native flora incredibly seriously. You can't just dig up, move, or destroy certain protected plants, even on your own private property, without notifying the Department of Agriculture. And at the very top of that highly protected list, the saguaro cactus. The law was clear. If a saguaro cactus is planted and tagged with an official state permit, it becomes protected by state law. Moving it, destroying, or even aggressively trimming it without a highly specific relocation permit and a certified botanist is a Class 4 felony. It carries massive fines, potential jail time, and a bureaucratic nightmare of paperwork that takes months to clear. Brenda wanted to play games with landscaping. I was going to give her a permanent installation. I grabbed my keys. I didn't just need a plant. I needed a weaponized succulent. So I drove down to this certified desert nursery on the outskirts of Phoenix. I mean, honestly, stepping into this place was like walking into a spike-filled fortress. I found this guy working there, a dude named Carl, who looked like he'd been baked in the sun since the late 90s. I told him I needed a saguaro. Not a baby one, and not a massive 2-ton behemoth, but something substantial. Something with, presence. Carl walked me over to this row of 4-foot beauties. He explained the whole tagging process, which was literally exactly what I needed to hear. Every legal saguaro sold in Arizona gets an agricultural tag attached to it. It's like a VIN number for a cactus. I need that tag on there tight, I told Carl, pointing at a perfectly straight, incredibly prickly 4-footer. Like, legally binding tight. Carl just shrugged. State puts 'em on, man. It's a felony to take 'em off. Music to my ears. I paid the $400, which honestly felt like a bargain for the amount of psychological warfare I was about to unleash. Then we loaded this spiky missile into the back of my wife's SUV. She was thrilled about the dirt, by the way. Along with 6 bags of specialized cactus soil and a couple of bags of decorative Scottsdale river rock. If I was doing this, I was making it aesthetically compliant. I mean, the CC&Rs practically demanded it. I waited for Tuesday night. Tuesday is garbage night, which means everyone is asleep by 10 p.m. and nobody is paying attention to anything outside. Around 1 a.m., I geared up. I'm talking thick leather work gloves, a headlamp set to red light mode so I wouldn't ruin my night vision, and a heavy-duty shovel. I literally felt like I was in a Zero Dark 30 raid, except my target was a pothole and my weapon was a succulent. I wheeled the saguaro out to the crater in a wheelbarrow. The street was dead silent. Just the hum of air conditioners and the distant howl of a coyote. I started digging out the loose, broken asphalt at the bottom of the pothole to reach the dirt subbase. It took like an hour of sweaty, back-breaking work. I dumped in the specialized soil, carefully hoisted the cactus, getting pricked through the leather gloves twice, which honestly just fueled my petty fire, and set it dead center. I packed the dirt down tight. Then, I meticulously arranged the decorative river rock around the base so it sat flush with the street level. It looked magnificent, like a tiny, perfectly manicured desert island in a sea of terrible infrastructure. But I wasn't done. Oh no, you don't execute a masterclass in malicious compliance without signing your work. I pulled out a little wooden stake I'd prepared earlier. Attached to it was a custom-engraved brass plaque I had rush-ordered from a trophy shop. I drove the stake into the soil right next to the cactus. I shined my red light on it one last time to admire the craftsmanship. It read, "The Brenda Botanical Garden. Established 2026. Please enjoy the natural aesthetic." I cleaned up my tools, swept the stray dirt into a dustpan, and went back inside. I literally slept like a baby. The next morning I was up at 6 a.m. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, grabbed a lawn chair, and set it up right in the middle of my driveway. I just sat there, sipping my dark roast, waiting for the inevitable. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the high-pitched whine of an electric motor echoed down Desert Oasis Way. It was Brenda, doing her morning patrol in the golf cart, hunting for unauthorized trash cans and slightly overgrown ficus trees. I watched her turn the corner. She was looking at a clipboard, driving with one hand. She didn't even look up until she was about 20 feet away. The golf cart tires locked up, skidding on the asphalt with a sharp screech. She stopped dead, staring at the middle of the road. From my driveway, I could literally see the color drain from her face, followed instantly by a tidal wave of magenta rage flushing up her neck. She sat there for a solid 10 seconds, frozen, her brain short-circuiting as it tried to process the 4-foot, legally protected tagged saguaro cactus currently thriving in the pothole she refused to pave. She looked at the cactus. She looked at the river rock. She leaned over and squinted at the brass plaque. And then she looked at me. I just raised my coffee mug in a silent toast and took a sip. Brenda slammed the golf cart into park, practically leaping out of the vehicle. She marched up my driveway with the furious, stomping energy of a dictator who just realized the peasants had seized the armory. "Jack!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the stucco houses. "What is the meaning of this? What is that thing doing in the street?" "Good morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone offensively cheerful. "Beautiful day, isn't it? I see you noticed the new landscaping." "Landscaping?" She was practically vibrating, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at the pothole. "You planted a tree in the middle of a public thoroughfare. Are you out of your mind? I am fining you. I am calling the city. I am going to have you sued for destruction of property." Whoa, Brenda. Let's just take a breath," I said, standing up and brushing invisible dust off my jeans. "I guess you didn't read the CC&Rs recently. Section 7, Paragraph B. The hazard was unaddressed for 90 days. I provided written notice. Since the HOA lacked the, what did you call it, liquid capital? I took it upon myself to implement temporary, non-destructive landscaping measures to mark the hazard for the safety of the community. "A cactus is not a marker," she screamed, her hairspray seemingly fighting a losing battle against the sheer heat of her anger. "It is an obstruction. You are blocking the road." "Honestly, it adheres perfectly to the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood," I replied, gesturing grandly to the desert landscaping in my own front yard. "And it marks the hazard quite clearly. Nobody is going to accidentally drive into that pothole now, are they?" "I am having it removed," Brenda snarled, turning on her heel. "I am calling Public Works right now, and I am billing you for the extraction." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said softly. "I mean, I really wanted to savor this moment." She stopped and spun back around. "Excuse me?" "Go look closely at the north side of the cactus, Brenda," I said, pointing. "Just right near the base. See that little metal band looped around the needles?" She squinted, marching back over to the pothole. She leaned in, being careful not to impale herself, and stared at the agricultural tag. That, I continued, projecting my voice so the neighbors who were now peeking out of their windows could hear, is an official state of Arizona Department of Agriculture protection tag. That saguaro is legally protected under ARS Section 3, 901. Removing it, damaging it, or even aggressively breathing on it without a certified botanist and a state-approved relocation permit is a Class 4 felony. Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She literally looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. So, I smiled, taking another sip of coffee. If you touch my temporary landscaping marker, Brenda, you're not dealing with the HOA bylaws anymore. You're dealing with the state of Arizona. Have a blessed day. She didn't have a blessed day. She had a meltdown. She scrambled back into her golf cart, practically threw it in reverse, and sped off, dialing her cell phone so aggressively I thought she was going to crack the screen. I went back inside and set up a lawn chair by my front window. I knew exactly what was coming next. Brenda wasn't the type to admit defeat. Especially not when her ego was plastered on a brass plaque in the middle of the street. It took about 45 minutes. Honestly, I was surprised it took that long. 2 Scottsdale police SUVs rolled down Desert Oasis Way, their lights flashing silently. They pulled up right in front of the Brenda Botanical Garden and parked at an angle to block the road. I grabbed my meticulously organized binder, the sovereign holy grail of documentation, and walked out the front door just as Brenda arrived in her golf cart, trailing the cops like a remora fish on a shark. 2 officers got out. One was a tall, older guy with a gray mustache, and the other was younger, maybe in his late 20s. They both stood there for a solid minute, hands resting on their utility belts, just staring at the cactus. "Officer!" Brenda yelled, scrambling out of her cart. "That's him! That's the man! He vandalized the street! He planted a massive obstruction. I want him arrested for criminal mischief and reckless endangerment!" The older officer, who let's call Officer Miller, slowly turned to look at Brenda, then looked at me, and then back at the cactus. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice slow and heavy with the exhaustion of a man who has dealt with too many HOA disputes. "You called in a malicious destruction of public infrastructure. Is this the incident?" "Yes!" Brenda shrieked, pointing at my beautiful tagged son. "He drilled into the asphalt and planted a tree." "It's a saguaro, actually," I chimed in, walking down the driveway with my binder tucked under my arm. "Good morning, officers. Jack. I'm the homeowner here." The younger officer was literally biting his lip, trying incredibly hard not to smile. He walked a slow circle around the pothole, inspecting the decorative river rock. "Nice rock work," he muttered. "Thank you," I said. "Local supplier?" "Sir," Officer Miller said, sighing deeply. "Can you explain why there is a cactus in the middle of the roadway?" "Absolutely, officer," I said, opening my binder. "First of all, I didn't drill into the asphalt. This pothole has been here for 94 days. Here is the dated email correspondence with the HOA board, specifically Treasurer Brenda here, notifying them of the hazard." I handed him a printout. Miller took it, scanning the page. "Furthermore," I continued, flipping to the next tab, "according to the HOA's own CC&Rs, Section 7, Paragraph B, which I have highlighted for your convenience, if the board fails to address a hazard after 90 days, homeowners are explicitly permitted to install temporary non-destructive landscaping measures to mark the hazard." I handed him the highlighted CC&R page. Brenda looked like she was going to explode. "That clause is meant for like a potted plant," Brenda yelled. "Not a permanent installation." "The bylaws don't specify container size, Brenda," I replied smoothly. "And it is temporary. It's only there until the HOA paves the road." Officer Miller rubbed his temples. "Okay, look. Bylaws aside, you can't block a traffic lane. The city is going to have a problem with this. We're going to have to ask the HOA to remove it to clear the right-of-way." "Aha!" Brenda crowed, pointing a triumphant finger at me. "You hear that? We are removing it, right now. I'll go get the maintenance crew. Hold on, I said, holding up a finger. Officer, before you authorize anyone to touch that plant, I need you to inspect the metal tag at the base. Both officers frowned. The younger one stepped closer, crouching down near the river rock. He squinted at the metal band looped around the base of the saguaro. It's a Department of Agriculture tag, the younger officer said, looking up at Miller. It's got a state serial number. Miller's eyes widened slightly. He looked at me. You bought a tagged saguaro just to put it in a pothole? I wanted to ensure my temporary hazard marker was of the highest legal and aesthetic quality, I said, trying to keep a straight face. But as I'm sure you're aware, officer, ARS Section 3, 901 strictly prohibits the removal, destruction, or relocation of a tagged native plant without a permit from the Department of Agriculture and a certified botanist on site. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. You could hear the desert wind rustling the dry leaves on Brenda's pristine lawn. The younger officer stood up. He looked at the tag, looked at Brenda, looked at me, and then completely lost it. He burst out laughing. He literally had to turn away and put his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Officer Miller let out a long, slow breath, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mustache. He handed my papers back to me. Ma'am, Miller said, turning to Brenda. His voice completely deadpan. This is a civil matter, and a state agriculture matter. The Scottsdale Police Department does not have the jurisdiction to authorize the destruction of a protected native plant. What? Brenda screeched, her voice cracking. You're the police. Arrest him. Rip it out. If you or your maintenance crew damages that cactus without a state permit, ma'am, Miller continued, his tone suddenly very firm, we will have to return to cite you for a Class 4 felony under state law. I highly advise against touching it. But it's in the road, Brenda sputtered, gesturing wildly. I suggest you contact the Department of Agriculture, ma'am, the younger officer said, having mostly recovered his composure, though he was still grinning. Or, pave the road. The officers walked back to their SUV. Before getting in, the younger cop pulled out his personal cell phone. Walked over to the cactus and took a quick selfie with the Brenda Botanical Garden plaque. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove away. I stood in my driveway, the absolute victor of the morning. Brenda stood by her golf cart, utterly defeated, staring at the spiky green monument to her own stubbornness. Like I said, Brenda, I called out as I turned to walk back inside. Have a blessed day. Honestly, I figured after the Scottsdale police literally laughed in her face and told her she'd catch a felony charge, Brenda would just, retreat to her lair and rethink her life choices. I mean, that's what a rational human being would do, but I clearly underestimated the sheer, unadulterated hubris of a suburban HOA treasurer who has never been told no in her entire tenure. It was around 2 p.m. that same afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, scrubbing through the footage I'd caught on my porch camera of the cops dunking on her, getting ready to edit the next Sovereign Justice masterpiece, when I heard the distinct, heavy rumble of a diesel engine, not a delivery truck, like a heavy-duty, off-the-books industrial diesel engine. I looked out the window and literally I couldn't believe my eyes. Pulling right up to the Brenda Botanical Garden was a beat-up, rusted-out Chevy flatbed truck towing a flatbed trailer. It had no company logos, no DOT numbers, nothing. Just two guys in neon yellow vests who looked like they were paid exclusively in cash and energy drinks. And there, standing on the sidewalk and pointing aggressively at my beautiful, legally protected saguaro, was Brenda. She had gone completely rogue. If the city and the state wouldn't help her, she was going to handle it through the black market of landscaping. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and bolted out the front door. Hey, whoa, whoa! Whoa! I yelled, jogging down the driveway. The driver, a burly guy with a thick beard and mirrored sunglasses, was already unspooling a heavy-duty steel winch cable from the front of the truck. His partner was walking toward the saguaro carrying what looked like a massive pair of heavy canvas straps. "Ignore him!" Brenda shrieked at the men, not even looking at me. "Just get that monstrosity out of the street. Wrap it around the base and yank it out." "Hold on a second, guys," I said. Stepping right between the bearded guy and the pothole, holding my phone up to record the entire interaction. "Before you commit a Class 4 felony for whatever she's paying you, you might want to look at what you're about to rip out of the ground." The bearded guy stopped unspooling the cable. He looked at me, then looked at Brenda, clearly annoyed. "Lady said it was a weed blocking the road. We're just here to pull it." "Honestly, man, does that look like a weed to you?" I asked. "That's a name," pointing the camera at the 4-foot cactus, which was looking incredibly majestic in the afternoon sun. "That is a saguaro cactus, and more importantly, if you look right down there at the base, it has an official, state-issued Department of Agriculture protection tag." The guy with the canvas straps froze. He literally dropped one of the straps on the asphalt. "Wait, it's tagged?" "It is heavily tagged," I confirmed, zooming in on the metal band. "According to Arizona Revised Statute Section 3, 901, unauthorized removal, destruction, or even transportation of a protected native plant without a certified botanist and a state permit carries massive fines, like bankrupt your business fines and potential jail time." "He's lying!" Brenda screamed, her face turning that familiar shade of terrifying magenta. "It's a fake tag. He bought it at a costume shop. Just pull it out!" The bearded guy slowly walked over to the pothole. He crouched down, pushed his mirrored sunglasses down the bridge of his nose, and squinted at the metal tag. He read the serial number. He read the state seal. He stood up, let out a massive sigh, and looked at Brenda. "Lady," he said, his voice deep and rumbling, "that's a real tag. I ain't touching that thing. My brother-in-law got hit with a $10,000 fine for bulldozing a tagged ironwood tree 2 years ago. I'm not losing my truck over a neighborhood dispute." "I am paying you $500 in cash," Brenda yelled, stamping her foot like a literal toddler. "Pull it out right now. I authorize it. I am the HOA treasurer." "I don't care if you're the governor of Arizona," the bearded guy said, walking back to his truck and hitting the button to retract the winch cable. "You don't have the paperwork. We're out." "You can't just leave," she screeched. "Dunkor," running up to the truck and slapping her hand against the passenger door. "We have a verbal contract." "Yeah, well, consider it voided by state law," he grunted. His partner tossed the canvas straps into the flatbed and jumped into the passenger seat. The bearded guy threw the truck into drive and gunned the engine. In his haste to get away from the shrieking woman and the legally radioactive plant, he cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. The massive, heavy-treaded rear tires of the flatbed hopped the curb and dug directly into Brenda's meticulously manicured, HOA award-winning front lawn. The tires spun for a split second, ripping up a massive, muddy trench of expensive Bermuda grass, before the truck lurched forward and sped off down Desert Oasis Way, leaving a trail of black diesel smoke and flying dirt. Brenda stood there, staring at the deep, ugly tire ruts tearing through her perfect lawn. She was trembling. She looked like she was about to start crying, or breathing fire, or maybe both. I just kept the camera rolling. I mean, I guess that's what happens when you try to circumvent the law, Brenda. You really should have just paved the pothole. It would have been cheaper. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look at me. She just turned around, walked into her house, and slammed the door so hard I heard a decorative plate fall off the wall inside. I uploaded the raw, unedited footage to the neighborhood Facebook group about 10 minutes later. I didn't even add any commentary. I just titled the post, "HOA Treasurer Attempts to Illegally Destroy Protected Saguaro. landscapers destroy her lawn instead. It was, honestly, the most glorious internet explosion I have ever witnessed. Within an hour, the post had 90 comments. Within 2 hours, people were literally walking down to my end of the street just to take pictures with the cactus. The Brenda Botanical Garden became an instant landmark. Someone, and to this day I have no idea who, though I suspect it was Old Man Johnson who hated Brenda more than anyone, came by while I was eating dinner and placed a tiny, brightly colored sombrero on top of the saguaro. Someone else left a pair of oversized novelty sunglasses resting on its needles. By the next morning, there was a little solar-powered spotlight shining on the brass plaque. And someone had placed a fake margarita glass in the river rock. It was a full-blown rebellion. The residents were rallying behind the cactus. It was a symbol, a spiky, green middle finger to the tyrannical reign of the HOA board. But the real victory, the absolute checkmate, came 3 days later at the emergency mandatory HOA board meeting. The clubhouse was packed, standing room only. People had brought lawn chairs from their patios just to cram into the back. I sat right in the front row, holding my binder, practically vibrating with anticipation. Brenda looked awful. Her hair was flat. Her pastel cardigan looked rumpled. She sat at the folding table next to the HOA president, a guy named Greg, who usually just rubber-stamped whatever Brenda wanted, looking like he was walking to the gallows. "Order," Greg said, tapping the microphone. It squealed, making everyone wince. "We are calling this emergency meeting to address the situation on Desert Oasis Way." "You mean the illegal obstruction placed by Jack?" Brenda snapped, leaning into her microphone, though she sounded incredibly defensive. "Actually, Brenda," Greg said, side-eyeing her, "we received a certified letter from the City of Scottsdale Public Works Department this morning." A hush fell over the room. I leaned forward. This was it. "The city," Greg continued, pulling a piece of paper from a folder, "has cited the association for maintaining a public hazard, specifically the the pothole, on Desert Oasis Way. They are threatening to fine the HOA $200 a day until the road is made passable." "Then fine Jack," Brenda yelled, pointing at me. "He put the tree in the hole." "Let him finish, Brenda," a voice yelled from the back of the room. It was Old Man Johnson. "The problem," Greg said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "is that the city also sent a secondary notice from the state. Because the hazard marker is a legally tagged saguaro, the city cannot legally fill the pothole or clear the road until the plant is safely removed, and we, the HOA, cannot legally remove it ourselves." "So what's the solution, Greg?" I asked loudly, knowing exactly what he was about to say. "Dad, I spent the entire afternoon on the phone with the Department of Agriculture and several certified botanical relocation specialists," Greg admitted, looking thoroughly defeated. "To legally remove that cactus, we have to hire a state-approved botanist to dig it up, safely transport it, and replant it in an approved location within the community. The permits, the labor, and the specialized transport equipment are going to cost the HOA $3,000. $500. The entire room erupted. People were shouting, throwing their hands up. $3,500? Someone screamed. For a plant? That doesn't even include the cost of actually paving the road, Greg yelled over the noise, which is going to cost another $800. You refused to pay $1,200 for his car, Brenda, Old Man Johnson yelled, standing up and pointing his cane at the table. You told him we didn't have the liquid capital, and now we're on the hook for over $4,000 because you couldn't just order a truck of asphalt. I was protecting the budget, Brenda shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. I approved the mahogany gate because it adds value. A pothole is just a hole. The gate has been broken since Tuesday, a woman in the second row shouted. It's stuck halfway open. Anyone can just walk in? Brenda, honestly, this is entirely on you, I said. Gee. Standing up and turning to face the crowd. She had a written notice for 90 days. She ignored it. She told me to drive over people's lawns. When I tried to fix it myself with my own money, she stopped the contractor. All I did was follow the CC and Rs to the letter. I marked the hazard so nobody else would destroy their suspension. You did it to be spiteful, Brenda accused, her voice cracking. I did it because it was legal, I corrected her, turning back to the board. And now, because of your gross mismanagement and petty ego, the HOA is bleeding money. I move to hold a vote of no confidence in the treasurer. You can't do that, Brenda gasped, looking at Greg. He can't do that. Actually, Greg said, looking at the bylaws sitting on the table, he can. It just needs a second. I second, Old Man Johnson bellowed. I third, someone else yelled. Literally, the entire room raised their hands. It was unanimous. It was a bloodbath. Within 5 minutes, Brenda was stripped of her title. Her precious golf cart privileges were revoked, and she was storming out of the clubhouse in tears, muttering about lawsuits and ungrateful peasants. By the end of the week, the neighborhood looked entirely different. The HOA, under the new, terrified management of Greg, fast-tracked the paperwork. They paid the $3,500 to the state-certified botanist, who showed up with a specialized crane and delicately, thumb warrant, legally removed the saguaro from the pothole. They also paid the $800 to properly mill and pave the crater. The road is now smooth as glass. I can drive my repaired Honda Civic down Desert Oasis Way at a comfortable 20 miles per hour without fearing for my life or my coffee. As for the cactus, the botanist legally relocated it to the center of the community park, right next to the playground. Weird. The HOA even had to pay to pour a nice concrete border around it to protect the roots. I was walking my dog past the park yesterday, and I stopped to admire it. It's thriving in its new spot. The tiny sombrero is still perched on top of the highest arm. And right there, embedded in the new concrete border, securely fastened so it can never be removed, is the original brass plaque. The Brenda Botanical Garden. Established 2026. Please enjoy the natural aesthetic. I mean, if that isn't the absolute definition of sovereign justice, I really don't know what is. You can try to fight the law, you can try to fight the neighborhood, but you can never, ever fight a legally tagged succulent. Stay safe out there, read your bylaws, and I'll catch you on the next one.